Hello everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm working on a dress for my Feeple65 Chloe for all. If you're with me on Patreon, you saw some photos of me deconstructing a human dress and preparing the pattern pieces. The pattern doesn't fit perfectly on the fabric available, but sometimes you work with what you've got. To construct her dress, I first prepare a few pieces to make assembly easier later on. Most people will probably use one layer of fabric for a dress, but I'm using pretty sheer gradient fabric over the top of a bright blue knit. So the first thing I do is pin the 2 layers of fabric for the sleeve and sleeve cuff pieces together and use a zigzag stitch to hold them together. This way I don't have to fight with multiple layers of fabric when sewing the sleeves. I also connect the 2 layers on the pieces for the back, stitching only along the armhole, shoulder, neck, and down the center back where the zipper will go. Once these pieces are prepared, I start with my base material, pinning the front and front sides with right sides together, then sewing. After the seams are sewn, I finish the edges with a zigzag stitch. This gives us a nicely finished front piece. I assemble the shear layer the same way, then I pin the shear fabric over the base fabric and connect them by sewing a zigzag stitch around the armholes, shoulder, and neckline. I trim the loose threads, then switch back to a straight stitch and fold the darts in the sides of the assembled front. I sew the darts in place, backstitching only at the outer edge of the garment and tying the threads at the inner point in a knot by hand. I sew both darts the same way. Now the front and back are assembled, and I'll sew them together at the shoulder, putting right sides together. I backstitch at both ends of the seam. Since I already finished the edges of the individual pieces, there's no need to finish this seam. Next I'll make the sleeves. I start by putting the top and lining fabrics for the cuff with right sides together and sewing the point. Then I move on to the upper sleeve, taking a needle and thread and gathering the bottom edge. Once the bottom edge is all gathered, I put it against the flat end of the cuff, right sides together, pin it, and sew. It always takes a little fiddling to get gathers nice and even. Now we have the upper sleeve, the cuff, and the lining hanging off the end. Taking the needle and thread again, now I gather the top edge of the sleeve and fit it to the armhole on the body of the dress, right sides together. When fitting gathered sleeves, I always pin the ends first, then smooth the gathers more evenly. Unless you use a million pins, they'll always shift a little while sewing, so I try not to get too caught up in making the gathers perfect. I sew the sleeve in place, and like the shoulder seams, these pieces are already individually finished, so there's no need to finish this seam. Now we'll close the sleeve and the side of the dress. I pin the sleeve, cuff, and lining shut, and also trim a little bit off the tip of the point where the cuff and lining are sewn together so it makes a neater point. Then I pin down the side of the dress. Since I want the top shear layer to be free-floating, I only pin to just below the dart in the front of the dress, where the sides have to be sewn together for a neat finish on the bodice. Then I tuck the top layer to the inside and keep pinning down the base layer. We'll finish the top layer on its own later. Once everything is pinned, I start at the cuff lining, backstitch a bit, then sew all the way up the cuff and sleeve and down the side of the dress. Then I make the other sleeve, put it in, and close the other side of the dress the same way. The sleeves are already finished on the edges, but the side of the dress isn't, so I finished those seams with a zigzag stitch. Now I prepare the bottom edge of the base layer for a hem. Since I'm using a knit, it's stretched while cutting and the bottom edge isn't perfectly aligned, so I trim off the extra length where the pieces are joined and uneven. Then I fold the bottom edge up 1/4 of an inch, then another 1/4 of an inch to create a rolled hem. After that, I sew the hem of the whole bottom edge of the base layer. Next, it's time to finish the top layer. The sides of the sheer fabric are still open, so I pin them together where the front and back meet, then sew up from the bottom toward the body of the dress, where the sheer fabric is sewn into the side of the bodice. Once I get close to the joining point, I sew at an angle, meeting at the edge of the fabric where the sheer layer joins the side seam. Then, just like the bottom edge of the base layer, I create a rolled hem in the sheer layer, folding the edge twice and then sewing the hem down. Now we'll go back and finish those sleeves. Fold the lining to the inside, pulling it down over the cuff, over the seam where the cuff meets the gathered sleeve. This might take a bit. Once it's pulled all the way down, turn the edge in by about 1/4 inch. Then, using a needle and thread, whip stitch the edge of the lining to the seam where the cuff and gathered sleeve meet. Do the same thing for both sleeves, then turn them right side out. I use a dowel rod to turn the cuffs. Next, it's time to add the zipper. Pin the zipper to one side of the back with right sides together. Normally for this, you'd use a zipper foot, which is shaped like this. It has only one toe with a little hole on either side. But this is for my old sewing machine and doesn't fit the one I have now, so I use an open toe foot instead. As long as there's a gap to the side or underneath the foot for the zipper's teeth, lots of different feet can work. I take my time sewing the zipper. I won't be able to go all the way down to the zipper head with this foot, so I leave extra thread when I cut it loose so I can stitch the very end by hand. Now I'll attach the other half of the zipper to the other side of the back, twisting it so that once again, the right sides go together. This means the edge will fold to the inside and give a neat finished back. If you've never used zippers before, they're not as hard as you might think. Just take your time and check your work as you pin to make sure the zipper fits the way you want. I finish the last inch or so of the zipper by hand, then turn the dress inside out and pin the bottom of the back closed below the zipper. Once it's pinned shut, I start just below the zipper, backstitch a bit, then sew down to the bottom hem and backstitch again. The last step is to fold the neckline in about 1/4 inch, pin it down, and then sew it in place with a whip stitch, catching just a few threads in the base layer, making a tiny, almost invisible hem. And now the dress is done! The gradient on mine doesn't align perfectly because I had to work with pre-cut pieces from a human-sized dress, but I think it still looks okay. I'll probably remake it again in the future using different fabric, but this is all for today. Thanks for watching! Bye!